Summertime is a time of traveling, usually. And the big question that we always hear or ask when traveling is what? Are we there yet? With my kids, it doesn't matter where we're going, doesn't matter how long we've been in the car. None of that matters. Immediately, are we there yet? How much longer? But see, the thing that saves us a lot of time is those little DVD players that we have in the back of our vehicles. Of course, now we have phones in the back of our vehicles that you can just stare at and do whatever you want. But when I was a kid, we didn't have phones or a DVD player, so you had to find a way to entertain yourself. Thus began the traditions of car games. Games like I Spy or the license plate game or my favorite, Punch Buggy. There's also another game that I don't know if any of you used to play, but it's called the Annoy Each Other in the Back of the Car game. You ever heard of that one? Yeah, that's where you just start pushing and aggravating and interrupting and singing songs that the other thought was annoying. And deep down, you hated the song too, but just because it aggravated your brother, and magically you started to love that song. Or at least from the stories that I've heard. My mom used to lose it and just yell, "Enough! I don't want to hear another word for 10 miles. So you know what I had to do? I started mouthing the words, right? Well, why do we do that? Well, I think it's because we don't like the in-between. That space between where you're coming from and then where you want to be. We don't want to take the time to get there. We just want to be there. We want to jump right over there. Israel thought that was what was going to happen after they left Egypt. They would get everything packed up, click their heels together 3 times, and they'd be home. But see, after they passed through the sea, they came to Mount Sinai. And that's where they received the law and commandments from God. And it wasn't like a 20-minute bathroom break, or like stretch your legs, then get back in the wagon. They spent a year at the Sinai Peninsula. Why a year? Well, maybe it's because God was detoxing them. Well, detoxing them from what? Well, they had spent their whole lives in Egypt, which was a polytheistic society, which, if you remember, is just a big word for the fact that everything was a god for them. The dog was a god, the cat was a god, the sun was a god, the water was a god, the rock was a god, and God was breaking them from that belief. He was detoxing them from the idea that there were many gods, and he was doing it by saying this: "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." He tells them that over and over and over again. And what he's saying is that there is no longer going to be a parade of gods anymore. There's only one, and that's me, and I am. But after a year there, they leave and they start traveling north towards the promised land. In Deuteronomy 1:2, which is just a retelling of the story, says, normally it takes only 11 days to travel from Mount Sinai to Kadesh Barnea, going by the way of Mount Seir. So this journey should have taken them 11 days, or at least that's what the GPS says. I love my GPS, but there's a problem with my GPS, and that is every time I use it, it challenges me. 1 hour and 45 minutes to your destination. Oh, is that so? Challenge accepted. And see, if I make it 1 hour and 42 minutes, that means I won. I wonder if Moses thought 11 days, I can make it in 10. Or maybe he thought 11 days, wow, I've got like 3 million people to get there. So let's give it 3 weeks or maybe 2 months. Just give ourselves plenty of time to get there. It took 39 years for them to make an 11-day trip. Why? Well, after they left Sinai, they started traveling to the Promised Land. And when they got there, they made some bad choices. You could say they chose fear over faith. Well, let's see a few things that we can learn from Israel's wandering. The first is that obstacles may make life look different. You ever been with a group of people who were happy and everything was great, and then it took just one piece of news to change all of it? Perhaps a football party where when the team was winning, everything was great, but just one interception and the whole atmosphere changes. Or what about in an airport? When we were flying to Scotland several years ago, we were in New Jersey waiting for our flight to Manchester. And there was a good-sized group waiting. We were supposed to be on the 9 p.m. flight. We were all peaceful and just having a good time. But when they announced that the flight was going to be delayed for a couple of hours, all the peace and politeness was out the window. Everyone went from kind and considerate to kill the beast mode in just like a matter of seconds. See, obstacles may make life look different. Think about that as we continued looking at Israel wandering and starting to encounter obstacles and things start happening. Another thing we can learn from Israel is God is closer than he appears. There's a moment in Numbers chapter 11 that says, "Now the people complained about their hardships in the hearing of the Lord." This is the first of nearly a dozen times that Israel will say, "Are we there yet? We're tired, we're hungry, we're bored. We want to go back to Egypt." You see, when you start feeling lost, you begin to feel as though God's not here anymore. And that's what Israel did. They thought they could complain and whine because God wouldn't hear them. But God's closer than he appears. They thought they could get away with whatever because God wasn't paying attention. It reminds me of my mom when we were on those trips. We had this Cadillac, so it was like a long body car. Nice leather seats on the inside, you know the type. The kind that your shirt would stick to the seat in the summer. Yeah, anyways, on the way to Michigan, me and my brother were about to just come to blows because we had been locked in the back seat for 10 hours. And my mom kept warning us to stop, but she was way up there in the front, and we were way back here. So what was she gonna do? So we just kept pushing each other and fighting, and the next thing I know, here comes this arm with red fingernails up over the front seat, and she just started swinging, and she connected. Mom was closer than she appeared. God is closer than he appears, which, by the way, is supposed to be good news. Kyle Idleman says that our wandering happens in the in-between places where none of us want to be. The good news is that God is closer than he appears, even if you're in the middle of a terrible situation or holding the hand of someone you love dearly who's suffering, or if you're in the middle of a pandemic or in the middle of civil unrest, you're in the middle of a lot of just mass chaos and confusion. I don't know if any of you can identify with moments like those. When you feel lost or alone, or you're not sure what direction to go. But if you haven't experienced that, you will. And God may look like he's absent, but he's not. Another lesson from Israel is that difficulties will often magnify your defects. Think about it. Do you become a better person when you're delayed? Like when traffic holds you up? Do you become a more godly person? Not usually. In Numbers chapter 11, verses 4 through 6, we read, "The rabble with them began to crave other food. And again the Israelites started wailing and saying, 'If only we had meat to eat. We remember the fish we ate in Egypt at no cost. Also the cucumbers and melons and leeks and onions and garlic. But now we have lost our appetite. We never see anything but this manna.'" They're complaining about the manna, about the food that God is providing. Providing, mind you, enough to last all day. Every morning they would collect manna. They had no need, but they start complaining about it. That's not good enough. That they miss the fruits and meats they used to eat. Now, we don't really know what this manna was like. Someone once said it might have tasted like rice cakes. And if that's the case, then you're not going to understand them complaining. But do you really see what they're saying here? We miss the way things used to be. We miss the meats and fruits and things that we got back in Egypt. Oh, and those things were free. Hello? They were free because you were slaves. We always look around us and want the things that we don't have, but we also have this tendency to look back over our shoulders and see the things that we don't have anymore. And we say, if only we had that. That was perfect. Actually, the problem is that the more that we get what we want, the less we want what we get. And God has enough. And he says in verses 18 to 20, "Tell the people, consecrate yourselves in preparation for tomorrow, when you will eat meat. Because the Lord has heard you when you wailed, 'If only we had meat to eat. We were better off in Egypt.' So now the Lord will give you meat, and you will eat it. You will not eat it for just 1 day or 2 days or 5 or 10 or 20 days, but for a whole month until it comes out your nostrils and you loathe it because you have rejected the Lord who is among you and have wailed before him saying, why did we ever leave Egypt? Really what God is saying is you're such a whiny bunch of people. And the problem is whining spreads, which is our next lesson. Whining makes things worse. In verse 10 it says that Moses heard the wailing of every family wailing at the entrance of their tents. It started with one group of people, and then it spread until Moses was listening to every family whining. Whining doesn't make anything better, especially when it starts catching, and then you have a whole group of people whining. I mean, it can ruin a good time. It can hinder progress. It can bring everything to a screeching halt. So if you're the whiner in your family or the whiner at home, or if you're the whiner in the car going to wherever you're going, do everyone a favor and stop. Author John Ortenberg says that when he gets the urge to whine about something that hasn't gone his way or met his expectations, he started saying to himself, it could be worse. Because it could be worse. Remember, whining makes things worse. Tough times will come. And we don't get to choose that, but what we do get to choose is how we respond to it. Another lesson is that fear creates large blind spots. Now, there are folks who are really suffering. They've lost someone they love. They've been diagnosed with terminal illnesses. Those are real. And in my experience, they're usually the ones who complain the least. We forget that God is with us. Israel forgot that God was with them, and it created huge blind spots. This same generation watched God work in Egypt and watched the plagues, and they were delivered from Pharaoh. They walked through the parted sea on dry ground. Yet when they get in the promised land, they get right there, right at the border, and they form a committee. That was their first mistake. And they send in 12 guys. Listen to their names in chapter 13. Shammua, Shaphat, Egal, Palte, Gadiel, Amiel, Sether, Nabi, Guel. Do you know who any of these people are? Do you know these 10 names? That's 10 of the 12 guys. But do you remember any of these names? Joshua and Caleb. No one remembers the first list. No one ever talks about, oh yeah, good old Gadiel, he did a great job. No one ever talks about them. But they remember Joshua and Caleb. And I want you to think about this. Which list would you like to be on? Because they send these 12 spies into the promised land. And those first 10 names come back from scouting the land, and they start telling them, there's no way we can do this. There are giants in the land. How could we even possibly begin to take this land? Never mind the fact that we watched God split a sea and walk us through and drown all of Pharaoh's army after leading us all out of Egypt and all the plagues. Never mind all that. How can we take this land? But Joshua and Caleb say, hold up, wait. We can do this because God is with us. Yeah, that same God who did all those plagues back in Egypt, the same God who split that sea and let us walk through, and the same God that killed all of Pharaoh's army, that same God is with us. But remember, whining always makes things worse, and fear spreads. They have too many blind spots. They forgot what God had done for them, and so they couldn't see what God would do for them. So God caused them to wander for 39 years. They get right there. All they have to do is trust God, but they didn't. And they wandered around for 39 years. What's the opposite of fear? Faith. And just as fear creates blind spots, faith creates hopefulness because of who God is and what God does. Joshua and Caleb say to Israel in Numbers chapter 14, Joshua son of Nun and Caleb son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had explored the land, tore their clothes and said to the entire Israelite assembly, the land we passed through and explored is exceedingly good. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us into that land, and a land that's flowing with milk and honey, and he will give it to us. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid of the people of the land, because we will devour them. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us, so do not be afraid of them. I don't know where you are in your journey, but I believe Joshua and Caleb taught to us from history. Yeah, but I'm just kind of stuck right now. Yeah, that's okay. God is with you. But you don't understand. I'm struggling and being crushed by stresses, but God is with you. You don't understand everything going on in our society, in our country, in our world right now. It's too much. Yeah, I agree, but God is with you. We need to stop saying what God wants from me is too much and what he has given me is not enough. And instead, we need to start saying, you're the God who is faithful to us and who sees us through. By the way, the generation who saw God and all the miracles he did in Egypt but wouldn't trust him, they're the ones that did not get to go into the promised land. It wasn't the golden calf or even the complaining. It was the point where Israel said, I don't know, God. I don't think you've got it in you to handle this one. How do you think that makes God feel? When we say, I don't think you can handle my issues or my family struggles. I don't think you can change my family member or change my parents or my siblings. I don't think you can change my friends. It's those times that we need to remember that God is closer than he appears. And remember this, every time you have the chance to whine, you also have the chance to worship. The story is told of a missionary in India who was working with a group of lepers, and one night, as they were sitting around a fire, she wanted to give them a chance to just speak about their worries, to just vent or whatever. And she looked around the circle at their faces, some missing their noses, their lips, some with tears in their eyes. And she waited for them to speak. And then she saw one hand start rising, missing all the fingers. And the young girl said, could we sing that song about counting your blessings? That's always been my favorite. Whine or worship? It's your choice. Have a blessed week.